When the weakened hyena first pressed the rare cub to her side, the savannah seemed to hold its breath. What happened in the next few minutes shocked even the hardened rangers. The air over the savannah was heavy and still, a blanket of heat pressing down on the cracked earth. Thin blades of grass rattled softly under a dry wind, and somewhere in the distance a hornbill called, its sound echoing through the low scrub. The scent of dust and animal musk hung in the air. In a shallow den beneath a tangle of thorny acacia roots, a female hyena lay on her side, her flanks trembling from the effort of birth. She had just delivered 3 cubs. 2 were a familiar mottled brown, their coats damp and dark. The third, though, was unlike any cub she had ever seen. His fur was pale and streaked with faint markings, the sort of coloring rarely seen in the species. His movements were weak but determined as he pressed against her belly in search of milk. The female lowered her massive head and nuzzled him, a low rumble rising in her throat. Not a growl, but a sound of recognition and care. Outside, the heat shimmered. Insects whirred and clicked, and every sound felt amplified. The female's ears flicked nervously at a distant snap of branches. She licked her cubs again, her tongue slow and deliberate, but her muscles stayed tight. She had chosen this hidden den for its safety, yet the smell of blood carried on the wind was strong. From behind a low ridge, a shadow moved. It was another hyena, an older male known to range outside his clan. He had been driven from groups before for his aggression. Drawn by the scent, he crept forward, shoulders hunched, his eyes fixed on the den. The female stiffened, her head lifting sharply. Her lips drew back to show heavy teeth. She positioned her body so her cubs were pressed deeper into the earth behind her ribs and paws. The male advanced a few steps, head low, testing her. Dust rose from his paws. She answered with a low, guttural growl that rolled across the ground. The rare cub twitched at the sound and pressed closer to her belly. In the dry grass above, 2 wildlife rangers had stopped their patrol. They had been following tracks of antelope when they heard the growl and saw movement. One ranger crouched, shielding his eyes from the glare. "She has newborns," he murmured. The other lifted binoculars but did not speak. They both knew how dangerous a confrontation between hyenas could become, especially with cubs involved. The rangers had no weapons for defense, only a walking stick, a canteen, and a flare. The male hyena came closer. His movements were sharper now, his muscles bunching under the mottled coat. The female did not retreat. She lunged once, snapping at the air to keep him back. He stopped, then shifted to the side, trying to flank her. Dust drifted between them like smoke. The rangers could feel the tension even from where they stood. One reached slowly for the flare. Inside the den, the cubs whimpered, their small bodies trembling. The female's breathing deepened. Her eyes stayed fixed on the male. She knew a misstep could cost her everything. She adjusted her stance again, blocking the entrance with her shoulder and hip. Her tail flicked sharply, scattering dust over the cubs. The rangers exchanged a look. "If he rushes her, those cubs won't make it," the second one said quietly. He lifted the flare, ready to strike it if needed, but he hesitated. A wrong move could panic the animals, and the mother might abandon her young in fear. The male's paws pressed forward one more step. He lowered his head and made a low sound, half snarl, half challenge. The female's entire body tensed. Her jaw opened, teeth white in the dimness of the den. The cubs gave a thin, high cry that cut through the still air. But what happened next to this rare cub turned out to be even more unexpected. You will not want to miss what unfolds as his story collides with danger and survival. The sun had begun to slide lower, casting a long amber light across the savannah. The heat was breaking, but the air still carried the dense smell of dust and tension. A faint wind rattled through the brittle thorns above the den, carrying with it the cries of distant birds. Beneath that sound came another, the steady rasp of the mother hyena's breathing as she stood guard over her newborns. The male edged closer, his paws pressed into the dirt with slow, deliberate weight. His body was scarred, a record of many fights, and his stance was that of an animal willing to risk everything for dominance. The mother's legs trembled from exhaustion, but her head stayed low and her eyes sharp. Each breath she took was deeper, louder, her throat vibrating with warning. The rare pale cub whimpered faintly, his tiny ribs moving quickly under his thin coat. The rangers shifted uneasily in the grass above. One struck the flare, the sudden crackle startling the birds in the nearby trees. Sparks lit the dry air and a thin smoke curled upward. The male turned his head at the sound, distracted for a moment. The mother seized that moment. With a burst of strength, she lunged forward, snapping her jaws near his face. Her growl rolled across the ground like thunder. The male recoiled, but not far. He circled, looking for another angle. The female's flank was bleeding from the earlier clash, a line of red staining her coat. Her movements were slower now, but her body still blocked the den. The rangers could see her fatigue as clearly as the setting sun, and they understood that time was working against her. The flare sputtered, casting flickering orange light. The male paused, his nose lifting to the acrid scent. One ranger stepped forward, waving the flame wide. The other raised his voice in a sharp, steady tone meant to drive the intruder back. The male hesitated, ears twitching at the strange sounds. His body shifted between aggression and uncertainty. In that tense silence, the female pressed closer to her cubs. She bent her head, nuzzling them for a brief second, then turned back toward the threat. Her body sagged, but her eyes remained locked. The rare cub squealed, his voice thin but piercing. The sound seemed to carry farther than his size should allow, cutting through the evening air. The male took one last step forward, dust rising around his paws. The rangers moved in closer, their voices firm, the flare bright in the dimming light. The female braced herself, her muscles drawn tight for another strike. Every creature in that clearing, human, predator, and fragile newborn, was suspended in the same fragile moment. The struggle for survival had narrowed to these few seconds. The outcome balanced on the edge, and the next movement would decide everything. The climax of this story begins now. Everything will be determined in the moments that follow. You cannot miss what happens next.